Give everybody a minute to join if anybody's joining. And then I'll call to order.
I think I know one.
Yep. Figure it out.
All right. I call to order this special meeting of the Verona Township Council.
There she is.
Friday, August 25th, 3:00 p.m. Madam Clerk, would you please read the Open Public Meetings Act compliance statement?
The notice requirements of the Open Public Meetings Act have been satisfied with respect to this special meeting of the Township Council, which is being broadcast via Zoom video conferencing. Notice of this special meeting was published in the August 21st, 2023 edition of the Star Ledger. The agenda, along with the written notice, given the time and date and public internet link and telephone call-in information, was posted in the municipal building and sent to the official newspapers of the township, the Verona City Grove Times, and the Star Ledger at least 48 hours preceding the start time of this meeting. The agenda can be viewed online at veronanj.org/council meetings, and a public comment period will be held in the order it's listed on the agenda, and instructions on how to comment will be provided at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Would you please call the roll?
Councilwoman McGrath?
Here.
Councilman Roman?
Here.
Deputy Mayor McAvoy?
Here.
Mayor Tambora?
Here.
Mayor also on the meeting is Joe Diarco, Township Manager, myself, Municipal Clerk Jennifer Kiernan, Township Attorney Pat Malia from the Alloy Law Firm.
Okay. All right, would everybody join me for the Pledge of Allegiance, please? I pledge allegiance to
Allegiance
To
to
the
the
flag
flag
the United States of
of the
America,
United States of America,
Republic,
and to the republic for which
for which
it stands,
one
nation,
nation,
under God,
indivisible, and with liberty and justice for all.
Thank my neighbors for having their flag outside.
Hmm.
Very convenient. Okay. All right. So we're skipping right to new business, being that this is a special meeting. Our sole agenda item today is to interview for our township planners. We have 3 firms that are interviewing that we chose from a 5 who had submitted proposals. The Neglia Group, DMR Architecture, and H2M and Associates. We'll be calling each one individually. The rest of the firms will be remaining outside at their as a courtesy until the other firms have been completed. Madam Clerk, if you could please bring in the Neglia Group.
Okay, we have Neglia scheduled for 3:15.
Okay.
And they are not yet signed in.
Okay.
But
we'll,
I didn't know if you guys wanted to discuss the process.
sure, Mr. Diarco, do you just want to give a brief background on what what our objective is today?
Yeah, selecting a firm for your redevelopment zones, your downtown study, and your rehabilitation designs for the downtown planner. Did I miss a piece?
No, that
Okay.
go ahead, Deputy Mayor.
I would say implementation of recommendations from the master plan
Correct.
in
Correct.
addition to that list.
Altering the zoning code.
And
Okay.
reading the zoning ordinance.
Yeah.
All right. We have
Yes.
we have Neglia in. Why don't we get moving?
I do
Okay.
actually, Mayor,
Sure, go ahead.
if you don't mind. So just the process for each vendor. So I'm sure they have a presentation, and then will you do round robin on seniority order for questions?
That's we'll give everybody the opportunity to present unstopped. And then once they're over, then yeah, we'll have the ability to do that. And we can go by seniority order, we can go by whoever has a question first. However, want everybody will have the opportunity to ask really as many questions as they want. Madam Clerk, we put aside a half an hour, right, for each one, or did we end up by doing 45 minutes?
45 minutes.
45 minutes. So well, plenty of time for questions. And we can always start the other groups earlier if they're on, or we can reach out or whatever. But so we'll have plenty of time to go through it. And for the public's edification, all of the firms submitted responses to our request for proposals that had some pretty detailed information that the council members have reviewed as well. Any other process questions from the group?
Mr. Antondola is on his way in.
Okay, sounds good.
I just want to confirm if he has anybody else, if you don't mind, if you can do that later.
Sure. All right.
Mr. Okay, let me ask him to unmute. There he is.
Mr. Intandola, welcome to the Verona Township Council.
Thank you for having us, Neglia Group that is, and my associate Lindsay Knight will be joining us as well.
Okay. Madam Clerk, can you promote her to a panelist before we go?
Yes, she's coming in.
She's being brought in right now, Brian.
Okay.
Okay.
So we understand that, if I may I start?
Please, you just heard our synopsis, right? Of everybody you'll have the opportunity to present without interruption, and then the council members will rotate asking questions as we feel appropriate. Is that okay?
Thank you. And as per the agenda item, we understand that you've done the hard work of enunciating your vision through the master plan, and that's, as we know, that is the high level policy part of it. So when the rubber hits the road in terms of reconciling your vision with the zoning ordinance, we find that there's two actions that are occurring. One action is that we are cleaning up, or would clean up, ordinances that over time they made sense at one point, but to carry forward, they don't make sense. And typically what I test is the fence ordinance for a corner lot. If a homeowner can't access the meaning of that, when the 3-foot fence starts and when the 6-foot fence ends on a corner lot, I think that's probably the most zoning officials have difficulty explaining that to homeowners. And so that's that's one of our litmus tests. And yours is fairly clear, but the sketch was a little bit off. It can't be 3 foot past the principal building. So then in the sketch you have for that, which makes sense if you follow the dashed lines, but that's the kind of minutia that we have to drill into when we reconcile a zoning ordinance, which, if you're a fan of home rule in New Jersey, it is the bastion and the vehicle that promotes the mien or the feel of Verona. This is where it occurs. Facades, decks, coverages, sheds, impervious coverage, management of forward-facing or facade-facing garages, all those aesthetic treatments that you are looking to create your vision that's called out by the master plan, and to reconcile it with the zoning ordinance is what we do. And we say that with confidence because I was doing an estimate of how many review letters our office does a month. And I believe I settled on the number of about 60 review letters given across the board of 20 active towns that we work for as the zoning or planning board consultant. And then those letters then go on to resolution compliance, and then ultimately the request from the building department to go to a CO or a TCO. So we understand the full life cycle of how important the zoning ordinance is. And I want to introduce Lindsay Knight. She is she's our principal planner at the firm, and has done what you're suggesting, and can give her insight into how she goes about this.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lindsay Knight. I've been with Neglia for about a year. Previously, I worked in the public sector. So I worked in-house for the town of Westfield, where I actually ran the zoning department. So I was day-to-day the zoning officer as well as the assistant planner. So, and before that, I worked for the New Jersey Sports and Exposition Authority. So I kind of had the unique experience of working on both sides, specifically with zoning. And I understand like the importance of the ordinance and it being something that the zoning officer can confidently enforce, as well as something that the regular resident in town can read and understand. There's no reason why the ordinance should be written in such a way that the zoning officer is inundated every day with phone calls. I currently work 1 day a week in the City of Summit's office, assisting the zoning officer with just even simple reviews, because they've become so inundated due to an ordinance that's pretty nuanced. So a majority of the day we spend just answering phone calls, answering questions. And in my opinion, those simple questions of where can I put a shed or where can I put a fence are not something that should be taking up a half a day of your zoning officer's time. So, and similar to you as well, I worked at Westfield when we got our master plan reexamination report, also written by H2M, and I was involved in incorporating those changes and those objectives back into the ordinance in Westfield. So myself and the town planner, we worked together with the help of H2M to incorporate those changes and make sure that the ordinance as well as the master plan worked together. Because it's so important, right? At the end of the day, when you go to the zoning board, you have to show that it has compliance with the master plan. So making sure those two documents work together is incredibly important. So in addition to working 1 day a week in Summit, I also have done a lot of ordinance work all over New Jersey, but a lot more recently from Cliffside Park to Northvale, Norwood, Edgewater. So we have a lot of experience in different municipalities, different types of downtowns, and working with different demographics. And once again, the most important thing is really looking back at your zoning boards and seeing what has been coming down the pipeline most often. Just based on going through your master plan, you can see that a lot of sheds, a lot of decks, a lot of porches. And it ends up that you can create ordinances that kind of benefit the development of things like the porch. In Westfield, we had kind of a bonus of your building coverage to encourage porches, because in Westfield, the residents really loved the way the porches looked. They loved the traditional architecture of porches. So they felt like creating these ordinances would kind of guide development in the direction that the residents wish to see. Same thing with Westfield has very like historic style of architecture. So creating ordinances that talk about roof planes and kind of discouraging that more modern approach to building to kind of keep that same traditional look that everyone so much loved in Westfield. So creating kind of simple little ordinances like that can help really guide development in a direction that the residents wish to see, as opposed to seeing, you know, everyone has seen it, right? The one house in town that you're like, how did that get built? So ordinances can really help with that.
And so that, you know, this is what we do every day. Like, I think I have, and if we find an ordinance is really lacking, we don't shy away from rewriting it and making those suggestions. Like, one of the things at Negley that we do is that we write a lot. We write a lot of review letters. We read correspondence. In some sense, it's old-fashioned, but in another sense, it is the language of how we get a record of a resolution recorded, and we understand it. We also have the modern tools of GIS. We're using GIS to analyze, you know, vacant land analysis, like for fair share housing. We have the capability of that. I think we have up to a 10-person GIS team right now, and we're really exploiting those capabilities that we have to do those types of analysis. Where are the most zoning board applications? What neighborhoods are they arising from? and why? And we can answer that question. And we log our blocks and lots and what type of variances that they're requesting to see if there's a reason why there's such a concentration. And we have seen that in other towns that, in particular Rutherford, they also love their porches. One family will build a porch, and then 3 families on the same block will want to build porches, but they'll need the setback variance. So we are familiar with that, and we've seen it as a practical matter. I mean, for myself, I think I'm out 2.5 to 3 nights a week in front of zoning or planning boards on behalf of the applicant. I'm not the applicant, on behalf of the board. And that runs from, you know, smaller towns like Woodridge through to very busy boards like the city of Clifton. So we know the pain of an awkward zoning ordinance, because that's why we are at the boards sometimes, because the zoning official has a tough time doing the interpretation. And, you know, that's what we present to you. We are 70+ person firm. And in terms of Neglia, we're very fortunate that if you find your way or you know, you're working for Neglia, our longevity runs on average 12 to 15 years. I'm there 19 years. Because basically when you settle into Neglia, not in terms of complacency, because the job is challenging every day, but you have to love this. You have to love civil engineering. You have to love planning, and you have to bring that passion every day. We find that the staff just is not long for us. They don't bring that passion to the firm, and you can see it because by and large, you know, they our junior engineers that just get their PEs or PPs, they stay with us. They really stay with us after that threshold, and we're not prideful, but we really are happy that that's occurring with our staff. So how does that work for Verona? Is that the people that you see in front of you will be around, and we believe that the way municipalities work, the way they consume professional services, is that a lot of it's based on relationships. That if a council person or a zoning board member or planning board member has a question that they're not clear on, or we did not explain ourselves with clarity, we are accessible. We're a phone call away. I'm in my office, you know, most days. If not, I'm very hands-on. I go do walkabout a lot to make sure that projects that were approved are built as per the approval. And if it's a project is not going in the right direction, we are quick to paper that or write those letters to advise the applicant that they are straying from their resolution for approval. And we see that full life cycle again. And that goes back to our passion to be a voice for the boards and to take all that experience and distill it into a zoning ordinance that is efficient and effective for both the township and also for the people that live in the town that want to do the decks and the sheds and the garage additions and the whatnot that you know, in the style that is basically reflects Verona style. So that's where we're at. I don't know if you wanted to talk about parking as well in this interview.
We would love to, as a matter of fact, because I was going to ask you about it, so you might as well.
Yeah. So
jump right into it.
So Verona is interesting, right? You have the municipal parking lot. One, I believe that you have the Park Mobile. It's cheaper to feed the meter with the quarters. I think it's like 40% cheaper or something like that. And that's, I don't know if that's a no, maybe I should not share that, but that's probably the Park Mobile top end as well. But you know, the layouts that you have, like with the for town hall by the library and back into the middle school, and then the other municipal one, I've toyed with the layout, and I don't think it could be any more efficient than what you have. I'm not going to pretend that you can put angled parking here. I really don't think that you're gonna gain much by in front of the middle school to do to take out the green area to make angled parking, because I like that green area where the evergreen trees are. So, you know, although I would like to report to you that I found a way of doing 30% more parking, it doesn't really lend itself that way. There's the alleyway between the Chase Bank, all the things that you would want to get parking to work for what you have, you've done it. There's the one gravel area at the dead end into the municipal parking lot where it seems that people know they're, for whatever reason. And I think that if you could have paved it by now, you would have paved it by now. Whether you don't own it or it's for whatever reason. And if you could pave it, I think you would have paved it. And if there's an environmental restriction such as it needs to be pervious pavement or things of that nature, you most likely would have done it by now, because then you can get those 10 or 15 employee spaces back or whatever you would want to do with them. But that would be my only suggestion, is at the end of that middle school field on the, is it the east side? There's that informal parking lot.
Yeah.
But other than that, you have an efficient parking layout with what you have. And I think that, my opinion is that that's special to Verona, that the greensward that is your campus and all that. I would not come to you to say that take it out, pave it, and come back in with, you know, like island landscaping. I think that would not. I would not propose that. You know, you can propose it, but I wouldn't put that forward. So then, you know, then you look for angle parking. It's a non-starter on Bloomfield Ave. Maybe some sections of Lakeside, but that's also the county. I don't think the county would allow that anytime soon. So, you know, it's as you know, we've all, but that lends itself to more of the mom and pop shops that you have that rely on the on-street parking and your limited parking. So it goes both ways, you know. You don't have the next level chains or national chains that some towns want, but on the other hand, you really don't have a lot of vacancies. What I saw on Bloomfield Ave, maybe more than you'd want, but you know, there's aside from the legendary class, the sporting goods store now not being occupied, I think that will most likely be eventually occupied as well, you know, and that
Yeah.
goes with the life cycle of changing commerce. But that's my 2 cents for parking. But, you know, wherever we can find more parking that meets an aesthetic, we can. We did that. I don't know if you're familiar with North Bergen, Bergen Line Ave. We did do the angle parking there, and it worked out for them. But that was a unique situation. That is not always the case. And the angle parking is not always the answer as well. But, you know, we find that our experience in Kearney is that if you have a daytime retail use that does not need the overnight parking, they've been pretty creative with having a license or an agreement to do the overnight, where you can put your meters in, and after 6 o'clock, you can park here. I'm sure Mr. Diarco knows all about that. I think he invented all that. But that could be another component of increasing apparent parking, but not building it out so that it becomes an eyesore. So that's our parking philosophy on a municipal scale.
Okay, thank you. We'll take some time, and we have plenty of time for the council to ask questions. I was just going to ask a couple, and I'll go to the deputy mayor, and we'll go down the line, and then circle back because I want to give everybody else the chance to ask some questions. But the first is, you know, part of the remit for our planner will be to help secure and plan a better downtown for Verona. This has been something that has been discussed since as long as I've lived here in Verona, which is 15 years. But at the same time, the residents want a nice, vibrant downtown, but they also don't want it to be overdeveloped. And, you know, they want to maintain the small town feel and character. So what would be your vision, or if you have some case examples of other places where you have been able to put together an achievable plan for a suburban downtown that didn't make it look too much like a more urban environment?
If I may, we know, like, for a vibrant downtown, at some point, there's going to be a pivot for your parking supply, right? And then, and that pivot, we know that has been successful for Rutherford, has been successful for Ridgewood. It's been successful, I think, Lindsay, correct me if I'm wrong, in Westfield. So there's a pivot of the downtown parking garage somewhere to be named. So once you have that pivot of the parking supply, you'll find that, like I introduced, that you do have the local restaurants that are not nationally branded. So that would be, in my mind, the pivot that Verona would consider if they were to take that leap of faith for that. And you may not want to take that leap of faith. You know, it's expensive. You know, it's fraught with management. No, another town that has an extraordinary amount of parking right now is Montclair. Like, I cannot believe how many spaces they have now, where they had the first generation parking lots, and now they've become or state of the art parking decks. And I just used one of their parking decks the other day to go to Raymond's. You know, it's convenient. I know there's going to be space on the third deck, and that's why I go there, even though it has the mom and pop feel on it's a Church Street, right? But that's the way it is, and successful because there is a parking supply tucked somewhere, which, if you consider your downtown Lakeside / Bloomfield Ave and those environs, that eventually may need to be done. So that would be my suggestion. And that's the towns I do know that have been successful, all have a parking deck somewhere that has supplemented their surface parking.
Have you,
And I'm going to add on to Brian a little bit. So we've worked in a number of towns as well where we've done redevelopment plans. I'm currently working pretty closely with Bergenfield. They have a downtown that it's much more, it's run down. A lot of the businesses have left. COVID really affected a lot of those businesses. So they're dealing with a lot of just vacancies, and they want to revive that downtown. One of the biggest things that we have found too is just finding design standards and streetscape standards that really modernize the space, as well as create space where people want to be outside. They want to walk around. I did my master's at University of Colorado. So Colorado is known for some of these downtown streets down in Denver. They have Larimer Square, which is just restaurants, beautiful stores, nice lighting, and it's an inviting space. And kind of seeing how those spaces have worked and incorporating those ideas into the streetscape standards for Bergenfield in hopes that this is going to create a more lively atmosphere and then attract the businesses as well as the people.
And, and that's done in the context of Bloomfield Avenue. Like, so do you go to the extent of trying to tame Bloomfield Avenue? It processes a lot of traffic, right? It's an as we know, it's an alternate to 280 and other ways to get to the other side of like, I live in Nutley. From it's an option for me to take Bloomfield Avenue up to St. Barnabas or take 280. It has that primary function. So if you were to say, let's put the run of from, say, like the diner, or where was it, the dance studio used to be, and the Regency, if you were to start a road diet from that to the west, what happens to the vehicles that would have been on Bloomfield Avenue, and what is the unintended consequence of pushing traffic somewhere else? That all has to be balanced too. But our experience is that when you do a road diet and people say, oh, that can never be done and you can never put a bike lane in, it works. We've done it in Montclair on Glenridge Ave. And, I'm like, they asked us, please try this. And we're like, what? And then, we work through it. And then you end up with something that could be like College Avenue in New Brunswick, bike lane, bus lane, and 2 live lanes, eastbound, westbound. And, that takes a lot of time to do that. I think it took Springfield 25 years to take Route 124 Springfield back, or Maplewood, I'm sorry, Maplewood, to take that back to make it a local road with their aesthetic. But it's, that is a generational investment. And that's what it would take, I think, if you want to have the next level of vibrancy you want in your downtown. It's not an overnight solution.
Appreciate that. We made some excellent points. The one thing that we get as a municipal council and is requests to re-examine zoning for specific lots, because the uses change and something that may have been profitable before is no longer profitable, and the owners of these lots want to do different things with it. This, of course, is something that when we have a zoning code, it does create a bit of a conflict for us, right? Is to determine whether we change these things upon request or not, and gets into issues like spot zoning and stuff. What are your recommendations to create a code that would be more I maybe would prevent some of these requests from happening in the future?
So let us take us to the example of the ghost kitchen, right? What is a ghost kitchen? Is it in your ordinance? No. Is it maybe a former bakery that has been vacated, but you have a successful caterer that needs to do a ghost kitchen? Is that typically defined in your ordinance? It is not. So that's, and so Lindsay and I were talking about this morning, that the strength of your definitions of what is allowed and not allowed in your land use ordinance per the zone may mitigate the need for what is perceived as spot zoning. If you try and anticipate usage, or at least keep abreast of what modern land use is going towards and find those uses and the definitions, and now you have the opportunity to do that in your zoning ordinance to make the definitions of those uses, that helps a lot. Or that we have these uses, we may not want them directly, but we will be able to write 13 or 15 conditions that will make it a conditional use palatable if they meet the conditions of the conditional use. So that's how, when you're looking to do a use that has not been anticipated by ordinance, our job is to bring those uses to you for your consideration during that process.
I think we also in Westfield, we dealt with this quite a bit, especially when there's vacancies in your downtown, right? You have the landlords who really do want to try to find a way to lease space. We dealt a lot with things like WeWork type spaces, where in a downtown, typically you don't want an office on your downtown, right? You want a business that's going to have the open windows, that's going to be inviting to street traffic, whereas an office is not necessarily going to work. So we would figure out ways that maybe having, okay, you can have this WeWork type space, but in the front you need to have a coffee shop or some kind of amenity to that space that can be accessed by the public. So like Brian said, finding ways that these uses that traditionally aren't permitted, but have kind of morphed into these new ideas and even new uses that were never contemplated before, and figuring out ways to make them work with the other uses in your downtown are so important. Another thing that we always came across too was like med spas, and with like Botox and things like that, how can that that traditionally maybe would be considered a medical use, but medical uses aren't permitted in a downtown, but maybe this is a personal service. So it's kind of figuring out those definitions of these newer uses and making sure that the definitions are modern for what is happening currently.
Thank you very much. I'm going to reserve a couple questions to give all the other council members time to ask questions. And if we have them at the end, I ask the ones that are most important on my mind. Deputy Mayor McAvoy, do you have any?
Yes, thank you. Lindsay, that's a very good point that you ended with, because I know it came up last year about tattoo parlors, how they've expanded their business to some helpful things for people. I'm going to hit a little bit of the downtown. And I do agree that sometimes we look at things and say it's going to take too long. So we go past that. When you talk about facades, and we can put, different regulations for that in, obviously you need the business on the building owner to jump on board and want to fix their building up. And obviously that needs money. I do agree that parking is essential. So my first question is, if like the town of Verona is limited in parking right against the businesses, in your opinion, how far away do you feel parking would benefit the central business district or the town center as far as walkable? In Montclair, we have parking garages. It seems like people are willing to walk 2 blocks. And I've said to people in Verona, if you want to walk 2 blocks, you can there's an ample amount of parking in our town. So in your opinion, looking at Verona, and it kind of, the question is also is, how did you prepare for today? Did you visit Verona? How long did you spend in Verona? If you can touch on all that.
Well, for my, in preparation for today, of course, I stopped by there today with my daughter to make sure that the Park Fast meters, the Park Mobile meters were working as per your website. I want to see, how the layout was. I've been to Verona a few times. I think Bobby Gash Jr. used to have a little pizzeria restaurant up the street on Bloomfield Ave. We used to go there too. We've been to the restaurants. Years ago, I worked on the Dunkin' Donuts. They tried for a drive-through, but failed miserably on Bloomfield Avenue. And I also worked on the Cozen when it came up from Bloomfield Ave. I was a traffic engineer there. And then, so and then my kids play sports in Verona. I can go on and on. You have the band festival that you used to have. I don't know if you still have it. You'd have to park like 4 blocks away. And I think you cut through someone's dead end and stepped over a small stream or whatever it was needed to get there. So, I'm familiar with Verona. A couple of my Nutley expats live in Verona. They graduated up Bloomfield Ave. And so that being said, my wife, she used to go to medical practice up on 23. So we understand Verona. The key with Verona is you got to remember that Verona is named after the hills of Verona, right? It's hilly. So what's 2 blocks in Montclair is not 2 blocks in Verona. So you got to also take into the grades. But generally held, it's convenient parking. When we do a review, applicant shall inventory parking within 1,000 feet of the front door of a new apartment building to see if there's on-street parking. So I think it's fair to say that 1,000 feet facade door to facade door, not including the verticality of the levels of a parking deck, is a fair barometer or metric that's convenient, And if it's too far, as anybody's practices, you drop off your mom, drop off your wife, they go get the reservation, what they're doing. You go bury the car somewhere and walk back. So, but there is plenty of parking, but do you want the commercial success to start invading your residential areas? Because it's kind of like there, you're not too far off Bloomfield Ave, like 3 blocks in. You have to balance that as well. So there is a supply, but is it a supply that you want to use if your downtown is as successful as you want it to be and not rely on structured parking? I hope that
Yeah.
answers the question.
And I'm in Verona at least once a week. I go to Alpha Fit Club, so I'm there quite often. And my friend just recently opened up Stretch Plus down the street with her husband. So I've been there quite a few times and I'm familiar with the parking as well. Municipal Lot 1, there a lot.
So just so you know, on September 9th, we're gonna do a ribbon cutting at Stretch. So 9:30 in the morning. See you there.
See you there.
My other quick question is, thoughts on, have you had any experience with how to zone old, I'm gonna be specific with like a Pilgrim shopping plaza. You know, important for Verona that a supermarket stays there because it's the only one in Verona, and it services a lot of people in that direct area.
So what the question is, I believe, is that how do you ensure that, or, you know, give a zoning or policy nudge that the supermarket stays as where it is, right?
Yes.
Right. So then, of course, you got to watch your pad sites, you know, in the front. Don't allow them. Make sure the parking's there. And even if the parking is underutilized, in Pilgrim, I forget the supermarket that's there.
Kings.
It's Kings, right? And yeah, so it's been there that's one of the original Kings in the neighborhood. I think it's doing okay. And then there's and that's the same plaza where the theater is.
They used to have a theater years and
Have
years.
a theater. It was a good theater to go to. I used to take my kids there. So, you know, you do, you have to make sure that, you know, the parking lot is well maintained, it's inviting, you promote that. And, you know, it's not, so, you know, if the landlord is decent, the plaza will be successful, right? And how does local government work towards having that? And I think that comes to a question of, you know, constant dialogue with the property owner, right? To make sure that whatever, you know, like sometimes you'll have an overzealous zoning or code official that for whatever reason, there was a couple of bad days where the dumpster area is a little unkempt, and you know, work with the property owner to make sure that's not the case, and keep that dialogue going. Other than that, you know, what we do know is that, especially in New Jersey and United States, that property owners have a lot of rights, right? So you have to work in that context as well. It's a lot of nudging, it's a lot of you know, positive engagement, and not making it so the owner one day wakes up and says, I don't want to do this anymore. It's a lot, and I'm not getting help from the township. So, and then he'll come up with another land use that, you know, he'll send to your zoning board. So that's what you're trying to avoid. By, I think, just keeping that dialogue going.
Thank you.
All right. Councilman Roman.
So we've talked a lot about downtown, and there were some very good questions asked. One thing that we've touched on the parking a lot. One thing we haven't talked about a lot is the building stock. And this has always been one of my concerns with our downtown, and one of the reasons why I feel it might be challenged in attracting things like destination restaurants or larger stores that are services to the community that people will use. We have kind of an interesting mix of buildings downtown. We have some older classic historical apartment buildings with ground level retail. We have some 1960s, 1970s one level strip mall type that some of them are underutilized. We have some buildings that are, you know, essentially long-term vacant. And one of the challenges that we have is we don't want downtown to turn into giant block-sized 5/1 apartment buildings. But we also realize that some of what's there now is not maximally utilizing the property or not encouraging the uses that we want. What do we do? And we don't have any architectural standards. One of the comments about downtown is there's not a unifying theme to it. What do we do with a downtown that is eclectic, that has this mix of uses in order to have space that meets the needs of modern retail without turning this into a giant, town-wide strip mall.
And that's the Pandora's box that I don't think Verona wants to open. 2 levels of parking on the first floor with some retail in the front, and 20 units up top. I don't know if that's a good fit for Verona. It will get you the wallets that you want to live in town, of course. I mean, that's what some towns want. They really want that. I don't know if that is compatible with Verona. How do you foster a little more density? Maybe you promote that if your ordinance prohibits a mixed use, maybe you promote it with a reasonable number of stories on top and a little looser parking standard, so it's not RSIS per se, residential site improvement standards, but it's on a case-by-case basis. So it gives you the flexibility that although you are lacking parking, if you want to bring the next level aesthetic to Verona, and that that's debatable, right? You do have a charming, eclectic downtown, and you don't want the more modern apartments, is what I'm hearing. So it's you have to find a way to promote more density, but without ruining the status quo aesthetic that you have. And that goes back to the pivot of the parking supply, right? So then you have enough municipal supply to say that building X can have 7 spaces, which is what Bloomfield has done in their parking authority. Like whenever you go to the Bloomfield zoning or planning board, if you're short parking, you go home for one set of hearings, you talk to the parking authority in Bloomfield, and you work through a couple of spaces that you may need, but you do not have that parking supply right now. I don't know if that answered that question.
And then also to avoid kind of those monolith style architecture, you can add design standards to the buildings where you make sure that the facades have some kind of articulation every X amount of feet to make sure that it's not just a solid wall right at the street level. You can make design guidelines where the buildings have to be clearly defined between a bottom, a middle, and a top. So there's changes in material, changes in kind of window requirements. And then alternatively, a lot of these developers want to put like ground level parking. And obviously you don't want ground level parking on your main road. So you can make requirements where it has to be wrapped with some kind of retail use up to some kind of depth. So there's different things that you can do to get creative. Also knowing that you have a certain design or a certain style in downtown, you can restrict the types of materials that are used. You can say no batten board. We want, we want brick facades. We want X amount of on your first floor, a transparency percentage to make sure that those windows are something that somebody on the sidewalk can look into as opposed to being covered up. So there's creative ways that you can go about making sure that when development happens, it happens in a thoughtful way.
Is it possible to encourage rehabilitation of existing buildings or expansion of existing buildings rather than full tear downs and replacements? Is that realistic?
Yes, it depends on, also you can do an area needs study and determine maybe your downtown can be an area in need of rehabilitation as opposed to redevelopment. So then there's the only 5-year abatement versus the 30. And then that'll also encourage these landowners to invest back into their properties because there's an advantage to them to invest.
One example.
I'm gonna
Okay.
just call you off for a second because we are becoming limited on time and next group's coming in. I do want to make sure all the council members have a chance to ask a question. You can always follow back with us in writing if you want, just on this one. Councilwoman McGrath.
Thank you. So I know that you reviewed our master plan, and from all of your experience at a very high level, how can Verona best prepare for the next round of affordable housing? How would you guide us through that process?
Well, I will say you guys have, I do housing elements for a lot of municipalities. And I will say that you guys have been making an effort towards your affordable housing where a lot of municipalities have not been. And I think that's going to be looked at really favorably by the courts versus the people or the municipalities that have done absolutely nothing. I think the biggest thing is you can look into ways to potentially have inclusionary housing, as part of maybe some of these redevelopments, or you can identify certain lots or areas within the municipality, as you've done before with your redevelopment plans, that would be particularly suited for that. But I think right now you guys have made those efforts, which is beyond some of the municipalities I've worked in. So I think you guys are, in my opinion, in a good place.
I think our concern and just fear is what 2025 would bring, and what is it, your opinion as our planners, to help create the biggest defense that we have for the future so that we are not at the mercy of all of these interveners that happened the last time for the township.
Sure. I think the biggest thing is looking at your realistic development potential, right? You are a fully developed town. So there are very limited places for you to go in and build an affordable housing development. So a lot of this is going to have to be done through rehabilitation or redevelopment. So I think just monitoring what's been built, and then looking at areas in town, looking at potential maybe overlay zones or areas that are suited within your ordinance that you think could be an inclusionary area, and then to kind of promote that use of inclusionary. A lot of municipalities also will create like little bonuses, lower parking levels, higher density, things like that, to try to, and then you'll have that in your ordinance, and hopefully the courts will see that you guys are making that effort.
Thank you.
Councilman, we have another minute if you have another question.
Yes, I do have another question. So given everything we talked about, just briefly touch on, the public is going to want to comment on a lot of these decisions. How do you see, what is your advice to us on how we would set up a process by which the public can participate in these conversations?
My experience, Lindsay, is embrace it.
Yeah.
Embrace
Yeah.
it. Embrace it.
Yeah, I have been involved in, making policies that the town agrees with. And then on the other spectrum, I've had to write ordinances for cannabis uses in towns that are vehemently against it. So we have a lot of experience working in the public side. And even just, I had done some redevelopment work in Hoboken, and we would have just open meetings of being like, what do you see this area to look like? What do you want to see here? And I think that's really valuable, because those are the people who day in and day out are experiencing being in Verona, right? We're there when we are, but we're not living there. So being able to hear real day-to-day experience, I think, is incredibly valuable and important to the process of creating ordinances that are going to help the single family homeowner, especially to potentially have your zoning boards inundated with variance requests as well.
We thank you for coming in and for your thoughtful answers, and for patronizing our Verona businesses as well. And we'll be in touch. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Madam Clerk, it looks like we have DMR in the attendee area. If you could promote them, please.
Yes. Here they come. Should be Dan Halburn, but I don't know if anybody else.
All right.
There they are.
Good afternoon. Can you hear us?
Good afternoon, gentlemen. We can hear you.
Do you want to share?
Yeah.
We have a brief presentation we wanted to give you.
Let me just give our framework, and then we'll go for that. So we are going to give you time to do an uninterrupted presentation. So we're not going to stop and ask for questions. So don't feel like, there's a problem if we're not engaging and asking questions.
Okay.
And then after that, each council member will have the opportunity to ask a few questions the remaining time. Last time we started with me. This time we'll start with Councilwoman McGrath, and we'll go in reverse
Good idea.
we'll go through that for the time. So the floor is yours at this point.
All right, thank you, Mayor.
Jennifer, I think you have to allow us to share the
We
screen.
can't share our screen right now. So while Dan is pulling that up, I'll introduce myself and our firm, and we can kind of go from there. So are we able to share yet?
Yep.
There we go. Okay. So for
I
those,
believe so. Do you see it?
Yep.
yes.
Thank you.
Excellent.
And can everybody
Yeah.
see the our screen?
We can.
All right, first box checked, right? So I appreciate everybody's time this afternoon. We wanted to give you a brief presentation, talk about who we are, just a little bit, and then talk more importantly about you and about the opportunity that you have. So DMR is a full service planning and architecture and landscape architecture firm. My name's Fran Reiner. I'm a partner at DMR. I run the planning group for the firm. Been here for 15 years. Dan Halbin, who's next to me, is a senior project planner. He's also LEED certified. And so in addition, we have our staff, our public relations and our marketing group that all support what we do here from our planning perspective. Some of the work we've done in Verona over the years, as some of you may know, Dan's been involved with the affordable housing compliance requirements. Dan's background, in addition to being a planner, is really in affordable housing. He's been involved with projects throughout his career. And we also represent a number of municipalities on the affordable housing side as well. In addition, Dan's been involved with a number of advisory memos that we've provided over the last year or two in cannabis and downtown, as well as in redevelopment. And then a little further back, our architecture side was actually the architects for the Ann and Lofts project that's on Bloomfield Avenue. A little bit of history on the firm, and then we'll get into the important stuff. We were founded in 1991. We're at 50 people in our firm. We're located in Bergen County, northern New Jersey, about 25 minutes from Verona. As I mentioned, we do planning, architecture, and landscape architecture. Our clients range from both public and private, where we do municipal planning. We are really specialized in redevelopment planning as well. We do not only planning from municipalities, but we're also planning board planners and zoning board planners for a number of our clients. As I mentioned, Dan does housing, he's an affordable housing planner. We work with both public and private clients. We think that's important because it gives us a lot more knowledge on what is going on in the marketplace from a development and redevelopment standpoint. So we believe we can better serve our municipal clients by understanding what the private sector is looking at in terms of needs. And most importantly, we get projects built. So, we're more than just policy planners. We're more than just writing documents. We really are looking at how to implement projects, how to get things done and built, and not simply be, a document that sits on a shelf. And so some of the projects on the right are projects that we've been involved with a number of different clients of ours. We do master plans, re-examination studies. We do redevelopment and rehabilitation studies. Over the last 10 years, we've done over 100 different redevelopment plans. We've designated over 1,000 different properties for a couple of dozen different municipalities throughout New Jersey. We do downtown revitalization. We write zoning ordinances. We also design public open spaces, parks, and streetscape, as well as being the first to have the resiliency plan adopted in the state and a community energy plan adopted in the state for 2 separate municipalities. In addition, our work is, we do a lot of pilot negotiations as well as redevelopers agreements. So that's a little bit about us, about who we are and what we do. And I'm going to let Dan talk a little bit about Bloomfield Avenue and the current issues that you're working on and dealing with.
Thank you, Fran. So Bloomfield Avenue consists of over half dozen zones just along the avenue and probably a couple more right on the perimeter of that area that I've highlighted in the upper right map. It includes a couple of public and semi-public zones for your municipal building and your religious uses. Commercial zones that allow mixed use as a conditional use, and some multifamily residential zones. The affordable housing plan that was adopted earlier this year, and the town center mixed use ordinance that was required by the affordable housing process, established the town center mixed use overlay zone, which allows for up to 70 units to be built, which has an affordable housing set aside requirement. Additionally, as a result of your settlement agreement with Fair Share Housing Center and the affordable housing planning process, you have a townwide inclusionary set-aside requirement, which would require any new development in your downtown or anywhere else in the township that creates 5 or more new housing units to have a affordable housing set aside. So that it has a part of the future of the Bloomfield Avenue corridor, most likely. Your 2022 master plan that was adopted last year included a number of recommended changes to the zones along the corridor, and some recommended actions for Bloomfield Avenue revitalization, which we generally concur with and would expand upon slightly. And as you know, any future zoning changes to TC zone, ETC zone, any of those zones along Bloomfield Avenue have to be consistent with the recommendations of the master plan. So the master plan made a number of recommendations about mixed use zoning, and we highlight mixed use zoning especially here, and so did your master plan, because it really is the key to Main Street and downtown redevelopment anywhere in New Jersey or around the country. It's really the ideal place to be bringing residents and businesses together. One of the big obstacles that was brought up in your master plan is that your ordinance requires an equal division between the any permitted or principal uses in a mixed use project, which we gave this little illustration diagram on the right showing what that would look like with a commercial and residential mixed use. It would require your first floor and half your second floor, for example, to be commercial, whereas mixed use in most projects and what developers are looking for would have been just commercial on the ground floor and 2 stories of residential or office, whatever it might be on the upper levels. Some even mix multiple uses on multiple floors. So your master plan recommended allowing for the kind of division that you see on the right side of that diagram. Also recommended allowing for residential and vacant office spaces, which is relevant in this market as the office market is suffering currently, and there's not a whole lot of demand for that. Your master plan also brought up that there's a 20% open space requirement for mixed use, which is particularly notable because in your TC zone, there is no open space requirement for generic commercial. You could have a large supermarket site and there wouldn't be an open space requirement, but for whatever reason, your mixed use would have to have that. So we think that you should, we and your master plan suggest reducing that to only have a buffer to residential uses on your smaller sites, and for larger sites, substantially large sites, working with developers to provide public space, privately owned public space like a plaza in front along Bloomfield Avenue, for example, or to make a contribution to your open space fund that could be used to beautify your downtown. Another item brought up in the master plan that we also agree with is to re-examine your parking ratios, make sure that they're not overly burdensome for the uses that you would see in your downtown, especially as parking needs have changed for retail uses and services like banks, for example, don't need nearly as much parking as they used to, as most people are handling their transactions online. and to permit shared parking to allow for your most efficient use of the parking spaces that you do require. For example, retail uses are most active during the day, and that's when residents are not usually home. So it will allow for that turnover of parking. And finally, the master plan recommended expanding the uses that you permit township-wide and particularly in your downtown to continue to meet the evolving demands of consumers and developers. And some of the uses that were identified in the master plan, which we've also identified, include uses that are prohibited everywhere in the town that I think that the master plan suggests examining or considering, discussing what the future of these uses are in the township, including various entertainment uses and recreational uses, uses that are prohibited in the town center and ET zones by omission, include limited service restaurants, bars, breweries, indoor recreation, art studios, retail showrooms, fitness facilities, and instructional facilities such as dance studios, karate studios. There's some uses that are maybe less relevant or can be subsumed into other use categories such as snack and non-alcoholic beverage bars that you don't see in a lot of downtown zoning ordinances as much. So these are things that could be looked at for the revitalization or bringing more activity and businesses to the Bloomfield Avenue corridor.
So, you know, we looked at and we look at for municipalities that we work with, you know, what are the strategies you want to consider to implement change? And certainly there are some, you know, there are plenty of municipalities that do it what I would call piecemeal, where they'll identify a piece of property and they'll designate that property for redevelopment and they'll do a project on that property. You know, as Dan mentioned, there's over a half a dozen different zones within kind of the Bloomfield Avenue corridor. And what we think is that you want to do it as a more comprehensive, holistic approach. That's how we recommend it to our clients. And we think there are three possible ways that you could move forward with this more comprehensive approach. And we think that there are some huge benefits into doing it this way. It's more cost effective for the municipality, and it gives them more control and more benefits. So the first would be one way you can do is you can simply do an overlay or rezone the properties within the corridor, create one set sort of zone, or at least simplify the number of zones that you have from a half a dozen down to, you know, a couple. It may require that a master plan be updated because it has to be in compliance with the master plan. It does allow for specific zoning in the corridor. In other words, you can have different zones within it, but it becomes more of a single type of document. But it does lack a lot of the benefits that the other two options that I'm going to walk through provide to the borough. So the second option, which is the option that we think is the proper option to move forward, one we would recommend, is to consider designating the area or areas as an area in need of rehabilitation. It provides the most control, the most flexibility, and the most benefits to the municipality. It allows for specific zoning within the corridor using the redevelopment law. And so what that means is that it can be broken into 2, 3, or 4 different types of zones within the rehabilitation plan. It represents new zoning, but it gives you the power of the redevelopment law. And what that means is it allows for you as a municipality to negotiate public benefits such as parks and open space. It allows you to negotiate parking. It allows you to negotiate the ability to do redevelopers agreement where the developer is required to give back to the municipality, where conventional zoning and rezoning and overlay do not. It's least likely for litigation over the third option I'm going to go through because an area in need of rehabilitation is designated by area and not by property. And it's a fairly low threshold to designate properties. It's over 50 years of age for your infrastructure and need of rehabilitation. There are municipalities within the state that designate the entire municipality as an area in need of rehab. We don't recommend that. We think that you want to designate the specific areas to promote that area as being special and where you want development, new development, revitalization to occur. Rehab also allows for financial incentives if the borough is willing to consider that, and it can easily be amended. So the township really has a lot more flexibility and control over the process. The third option would be to designate an area in need of redevelopment, and I know that you've done a few different specific redevelopment plans and designated specific areas, an area in need of redevelopment. So you understand this process. The difference is that if you want to create a holistic approach and you want to understand how to really effectively create a vision for your community, you want to do it within the whole corridor. Redevelopment doesn't necessarily allow you to do that because it's done by individual property. It's a higher threshold, so it would be unlikely. It would not, and I say unlikely, meaning it would not occur. You would not be able to designate all of the properties for redevelopment. So you would only be able to do certain. It'd be more like Swiss cheese up and down the street. So the only major difference between the rehab designation and the redevelopment designation is that the redevelopment designation allows longer term incentives. But once you do a rehab plan, once you've created the vision, you can then go back and do a redevelopment plan on top of the rehab plan and still provide those financial incentives if you wanted to. So we believe that the clear strategy should be to move forward with, if you want to revitalize, Bloomfield Avenue, would be to designate it as an area in need of rehabilitation. We believe that this is a holistic approach. It's flexible. It can be amended easily. It gives you the greatest chance for success and provides the most control and flexibility in terms of zoning. The steps are fairly simple. You would identify the area or areas, specific properties, you designate them for rehabilitation. Once they were designated, you would then move forward with a redevelopment plan, which essentially represents new zoning, and you could create a vision for your downtown for that corridor. That process allows a public input. It provides flexibility, meaning that you could have standards for different portions along Bloomfield Avenue, and it allows for the public benefits that I talked about earlier. And then on top of that, redevelopment areas could always be designated after that for specific projects, and they would be paid for by the developer and not by the municipality. So it's an easier implementation process than the other two would be. And then finally, I'll say that what we look to do as a part of the process is we look to have a flexible process based on what the borough wants. So that might mean steering and advisory committee meetings. It may mean working directly with the mayor and council or a redevelopment agency. We are involved with a lot of our municipalities. We do public involvement process. One of the things we do that we think is really beneficial is we do a lot of online monkey surveys. And that gives us the ability to go out to the public, get a lot of feedback that you wouldn't necessarily get at a public meeting. And then be able to have public workshops and outreach on top of that with information from the rest of the community as given into that process. As a part of our process, we provide drafts of each report for review before it's made public. We provide public presentations as part of the documents process. We make sure that we're open and inclusive. And as I mentioned, we have a track record of success in this type of work with over 100 individual redevelopment plans, 1,000 properties designated, and in a couple of dozen different municipalities. So if that's what you're looking to do, which is revitalize the corridor, we believe that this is the most appropriate way for you to do that from a strategy standpoint.
So beyond actions related to zoning and redevelopment plans, there's other actions that the township could take to help to stimulate activity in the Bloomfield Avenue corridor. For example, establishing a business improvement district creates an entity that is dedicated to the promotion of this area that's funded by a special assessment on the commercial properties in a delineated area, which it can use toward marketing, branding the corridor, street maintenance activities, facade improvement programs, and rent assistance to commercial tenants. There's other improvement activities that the township itself could be taking, for example, establishing a revolving no or low interest loan program for businesses, which can be used for facade or streetscape improvements in front of their storefronts. You can do various event programming, which I believe you already might do some of that through your Chamber of Commerce. Business recognition program, having elected officials pose with the business owners and award them with a plaque or identify them on the township website. Working to acquire or share underutilized parking lots in the area to take the burden off of individual lots to try to meet all of your parking demand in the corridor. There's obviously streetscape improvements that are small investments that make a huge change. Street trees are highly cited as being one of the best investments you can make in a Main Street area because they beautify the area. They make it shadier for pedestrians in the summer. They can bring up property values, which is great. Bike racks or bike share programs, having a presence of those in the Main Street area can give people an alternative way to get to Bloomfield Avenue without needing to drive, without needing to worry about where they're going to be putting their bike racks or their bikes. There's a variety of different options for bike share programs that don't require you to take up a huge chunk of your sidewalk or parking spaces with these city bike racks that you might see in New York. Public EV chargers will encourage people who have EVs to shop while they charge their car instead of having to do it at their offices or at home. Temporary street closings are good opportunities for holding events or opening areas for outdoor dining or other outdoor activities during the warmer seasons as well.
So I think that's it. I'll end on just one other thing. I think it's important, no matter what step you take, that what you want to do is you want to create a plan and a strategy that you can implement. You want to be able to understand what the low-hanging fruit is, how you can have success early. And those things are really important in order to build consensus to the public and be able to show that you are moving a direction that allows for revitalization. So we focused a little bit on Bloomfield Avenue, but obviously, we're happy to answer any questions that you may have about anything regarding your work or ours. You're unmuted me there.
Sorry, I was saying such eloquent words that I really meant. We appreciate your presentation. We're going to take some time for questions from the council. If you gentlemen want to stop presenting, just so we can see each other's faces.
Yep, absolutely.
Helpful. And we'll put on Councilwoman McGrath first. It looks like we've got 4 minutes per council member for questions.
Sure. Thank you so much for your presentation and this deep dive specifically on Bloomfield Avenue. One thing we hear a lot about from residents is that they really want to see Bloomfield Avenue improved, but they really want to keep the small town feel. And so how would you kind of guide us with that as like a very broad philosophy as we embark on this particular project?
Yeah, so again, I think, from our perspective, I think you're taking the holistic approach, which is to look at what the community wants, and you do that through both a series of public surveys as well as public workshops to say what are the things that they want to see in terms of scale and height. The question you always get is, and most important answer is what does the community want, and how can you provide the community with the things that they want? So the scale of buildings, the number of stories are critical. Is it important for you to have a more pedestrian-friendly, walkable downtown? Do you want more restaurants or retail? Do you want more public sidewalks with outdoor dining? So those are the things I think that the process of a holistic approach allows you to have a community input, and then you can build around that in terms of your redevelopment plan. You know, there's always some rub there, right? So what you don't want to do is you don't want to write a plan that the community wants, but that you're not going to get anything to actually happen in terms of redevelopment. And so I think that's the part where we maybe are a little bit better than some other firms, because we're architects and planners, and we work with private developers, and we work across the table and have worked across the table on behalf of municipalities on literally hundreds of redevelopment plans. We understand, you know, where that kind of rubber meets, and we can help guide, because there are things that can be done from a design standpoint that would allow for maybe a little bit more density, but not a different change in physical appearance. And so I think that's, you know, that's how we would approach, you know, that difficult issue.
And my follow-up to that is the intersection of this with affordable housing next round. So how does the next round of affordable housing I know you're intimately familiar with Verona's affordable housing plan. So what is the future look like for Verona in the intersection of this downtown project and affordable housing?
So I think I spoke a bit on this when I presented the housing plan back in May. So I apologize for repeating stuff. The next round is going to probably look a lot like this past round, where it's probably going to be the courts and the special masters guided by Fair Share Housing Center and other experts identifying what the obligations are going to be. And they're not going to be as much as they were this past round, and we're only dealing with a 10-year period instead of essentially a 30-year period of affordable housing obligations to handle. As far as the downtown plays into your affordable housing, any mixed-use projects that are approved in the downtown, whether it's through zoning amendments or through D variances to you know, get those 2 stories of residential over 1 floor of commercial, they're going to have to provide affordable housing, and it's going to be a couple of units at a time. But it's going to take the burden off of you in the next round, and it's not going to be significantly noticeable to anybody in the community either. It's going to be a unit here and there.
So just to add to that, you know, that's a really difficult question, because from a developer standpoint, building affordable housing is a loss leader, right? It costs them more to build the units than it does to, you know, to operate everything. So one of the ways that we've seen municipalities deal with this issue, where they are required to place affordable housing in these types of projects, and most importantly, they want the revitalization, they want the new project, they want the new retail, the new restaurants, they want the residential units, that's where the financial incentives become a really important part. And the municipality has to either determine whether or not they want to do that through, you know, pilots or not. And if they're willing to do that through pilots, then that's one way to offset the cost of building that 15% for rent or the 20% for sale. But those are the things that you need to have a team behind you that can give you, you know, the financial answers as well as the planning answers about, you know, it's not, okay, we have to build 3 units in this particular project. What does that mean from a financial standpoint? And is the municipality and the township have to provide some sort of financial incentive to offset that cost? You get the affordable housing, but you get the project you want. Those are the things that have to be kind of weighed and discussed as a part of these processes.
What he said.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councilman Roman.
So thank you very much for the very detailed and focused presentation on downtown. I did want to shift to some other uses that we've thought about throughout this. We obviously have a corridor on Pompton Avenue that is all a combination of professional and medical offices. We also have Grove Avenue, which has some obsolete light industrial uses and also has more professional and medical offices. What is your opinion on sort of the future of the light office sector, and what should a community like us do within those zones to preserve them as, functioning and useful areas within the community?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Historically, there are always ebbs and flows of the different types of uses. Residential is great, for years, and then it goes down. Same thing with office. Industrial's hot. Office is maybe not as much. I think there's been a kind of a break in that, though. I think COVID, what occurred at that period of time, and I'm not sure how much office is going to have a resurgence or the typical ebb and flow that it would historically have had, in the prior decades, before COVID. So I think it's a big challenge on how you deal with those individual properties, and whether or not, as a municipality, you want to look towards other uses that are maybe, more right now in the desire or the need. In industrial is more, medical office seems to come back. But our thinking is that a mixture of those uses within a mixed use area is really the key. So not these office buildings set aside, where there's parking around them. More of smaller offices located within a downtown and walkable distance. It doesn't have to be vertically integrated with the project. It can be an office building in the downtown, not one where you can walk to, as opposed to one that's in more of an office park. So, those are challenging questions, and I think that it's really a question of how the municipality wants to deal with its tax, its rateables, whether or not they want to look for maybe uses that they would never have considered in the past in those areas because of the tax rateables, or do you look to completely revitalize those with, what is highest and best use now, which is, residential. And of course, all the issues that come with that, school-age kids and those types of things have to be weighed. But traditional office and traditional office parks, in my opinion, are probably they're not non-existent, but they're not going to come back the way they had in the past.
Thank you very much.
You have time for another question if you would like, Councilman.
Sure. I'm just jumping around with uses again. What are the emerging uses at this point in time? What are things that are going in your mind that we should be thinking ahead, zoning for, making available to happen now? Senior
housing is one that is something that is emerging. I think as communities age, especially in a small town. I'm from a small town. I think it's really important to provide life cycle living. So, I grew up in the town. I was born in the town I live in now. I moved out. I lived all across the country, and my family and I moved back to the town I grew up in. My mom and dad retired. They left the town because there wasn't housing in that town. So they lost their friendship. They lost people that they communicated with. I think one of the key things we want to do in every community is figure out how we can have somebody have children, be empty nesters, retire, and be in the same community. So certainly kind of age restricted or senior housing is key. I think medical is also key, because as we age, as the population ages, there's going to be more need for that medical type of uses, not hospital necessarily, but outpatient medical uses where you can go and have procedures done. So those are the types of, if I were to say two, those are the two that I think are really critical. A lot of other people would say, industrial warehousing is also, hot, but a lot of communities, especially smaller ones, don't want anything to do with that. So the first two would be the ones that I would say are really important.
Some other emerging uses that I think that aren't warehouse are self-storage. We're seeing a lot of popping up everywhere. Indoor recreation uses like children's play areas, adult play areas like virtual reality spaces are also coming in these non-residential areas.
And there's nuances like bar, like they're now places where they're opening up bars and having dog parks as a part of the bar. So there's a lot of emerging type of things where both younger, professionals, millennials are looking to change what retail represents. And I think understanding those things and being able to zone for them in a protective way for a municipality is really important.
Breweries, of course, are.
Dan, I'm gonna cut you off just so we can get another question. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. I'm gonna go back to downtown, town center specifically. We touched on like businesses, and you touched a little bit on parking. It's something that comes up all the time when we're talking about our town center. I know you're familiar with where the Inn and Lofts are. That's our extended town center, and it's a little more wide open there, and the businesses have parking. But when you get to the town center, we're very limited, and without the businesses, I don't think are big enough or the town can't afford, say, a parking deck. Any other creative ideas? I always hear from people, well, shared parking when you have businesses and residential.
Yeah.
The residents aren't home during the day, but a lot of people these days are working from home. So those spots are occupied all day long.
Yeah. So
I want to touch on, like, just if you can touch on also, have you been to our downtown? Did you prepare by visiting some of the businesses and trying to park? And if we did acquire parking, is there a distance from our town center that you suggest is appropriate?
Yeah, so we've both been to your downtown. I've been there a number of times. So, I'm very familiar with the corridor, not only from just our recent work with you, but from, the time when Ann and Lofts was getting constructed. So I've been there over the years. So there's some nuances to your parking answer. Certainly everybody's going to say shared parking, and that isn't that easy answer, but there's difficulties in that. Your ordinance currently has a 90-10 split, where 90% of the parking needs to be on site, 10% can be within 1,000 feet. So, what we've done in some other municipalities is we've done things where it's one space per unit on site, and the other half a space can be within 2 city blocks, which is typically 800 feet. You allow up to 1,000 feet. I think those types of things are important. I think it's important on how you write your parking ordinance. So what we've done in other municipalities is a lot of times it's interesting because business will say, well, there's no available parking in front. And what happens is the person who works in the store parks in front, right? And if you have a 2-hour, they'll move the car 1 space forward. So you have to write ordinances that create opportunities for continued turnover. You have to write ordinances that have a maximum use time of half hour, 45 minutes, 2 hours. Certainly, what we've done in some other municipalities is when a project has the opportunity to add additional parking, we have in other municipalities done what's called a pilot, which is payment in lieu of parking. So, say a developer has to build 1.5 spaces on site, but they can only fit 1, and they can put the other half on another site. We've actually written ordinances where they have to pay into a parking fund. And so as a project comes up, maybe a larger project that they can add a couple of extra parking spaces, you take some of those revenues that you generated from the parking fund, and you can actually pay into that so you can have public parking in one of the larger projects shared. So it's easy to say shared parking. It's the nuances of how you do parking that really determines whether or not it does or doesn't work. The last thing I'll say about parking is that your ordinance requires parking for restaurants and for retail in addition to your residential. And what I would say, even though you don't have a tremendous amount of on-street parking, you really need to think about, and we would recommend really having conversations about new development, not necessarily requiring as much retail parking within the project, because the on-street parking services the retail. And a lot of times on those mixed-use projects, people won't park in what is perceived to look like the residential parking area. They only want to park on the street anyway. So those are some of the nuances we look at when we talk about parking.
Yeah, just to add on to that, we have been in a few meetings where developer will designate a couple of spots as being for the employees of the business in the ground floor, but won't necessarily be providing parking for patrons of the business, because they're mostly the patrons are mostly looking for street parking, and as Fran said, not necessarily going to be to consider parking into in the garage that they assume as the residents are.
I'm gonna ask one more question, and then I think our time will be up. As a governing body, we often get requests to look at our zoning code, you know, between master plan times, between zoning code rewrite periods, because uses of buildings change or are not as attractive or not as profitable. This puts the governing body in a difficult position, because we don't necessarily want to be changing the zoning code based on one request. How do you envision ensuring a rewritten zoning code that limits those instances?
So we've rewritten two complete zoning ordinances, one for Hackensack, one for Paramus. When we do, you know, I guess one of the ways that we would look at it would be if you do what we're recommending, which is to designate it in a holistic approach, the entire, you know, Bloomfield Avenue, then that would become the zoning. So your zoning ordinance wouldn't have to be rewritten for those areas. You would have essentially a redevelopment plan, which represents new zoning and you could then just amend that rehabilitation plan and or any subsequent redevelopment plans on top of that. And you wouldn't have to go back and change the ordinance. You would really just have a document that would then represent the zoning for that area. And then you could easily amend that rehabilitation plan if market demands change. If the municipality, you know, wanted something and then in the future decides it doesn't want it any longer, that rehabilitation and or redevelopment plan can simply be amended. You don't have to go back and change the whole ordinance.
Fair enough.
Yeah,
I mean, I think if I could just throw one thing in, if you could,
Yeah.
you're talking a lot about Bloomfield Avenue, but as the councilman said before, we do have some other areas where these things come up. So if you just touch very briefly, because we only have about a minute left, on how you would look at that for areas maybe not along the Bloomfield Avenue corridor.
Yeah, so again, you know, depending on if it's a corridor or if it's simply a property or properties, you know, we would, again, as both planners, physical designers, you know, one of the things we do every day is we look at properties in lots of municipalities, and we kind of do layouts and designs and figure out, you know, what we would recommend. We'd be able to do that with any number of properties within the municipality. You know, I think we've talked about Bloomfield Avenue, but our holistic approach is really for the entire municipality. So I you know, I don't mean to just focus on Bloomfield Avenue, because we think that obviously the entire township is important to look at. But those approaches could be similar in other areas.
And if the concern is, you know, that you're constantly going in and redoing your zoning ordinance because people are asking for businesses are saying, hey, I think this site would be good for this kind of use. There's forms of zoning that you can use that are more open-ended about the kinds of uses and are much more focused on what does the property physically, the development physically look like from neighbors and from the street, and what are the impacts of any uses on neighbors, and less concerned about is it this kind of store or that kind of store, and more concerned about does it generate noise, does it generate a certain level of parking, and does it look attractive on the street.
Thank you very much. I think that's a great point. And well, on that note, well, thank you for your presentation, for answering our questions. It's always good to see you.
Mayor,
And
thank you, council. Thank you very much. Have a great weekend, everybody.
All right,
Appreciate it.
well.
All right.
All right, Madam Clerk, it looks like H2M is in the attendees section. If you could bring them on in.
I will, and then I think I need to bring in, okay, so Shazan is coming in and then find it. So. Where's she? There she is. She's muted. Let me ask her to unmute. There she goes. Sonia. Hello, San.
Hello, good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
My name is Senegita Chavan from H2M. Long time no see. I'm joined by my colleague Paul Cancela. And first of all, let me begin by saying thank you very much for giving us an opportunity to present. I would request our clerk to please share our PowerPoint, and while she's doing, are we sharing?
You
Okay,
can-
Paul, can you please share the PowerPoint?
You'll be able to share on your end, just a brief procedural thing. We're going to give you an opportunity to present uninterrupted once that starts. And then we're going to have a period after that for each council member to ask some questions. So we're looking to make sure that we have about 5 minutes per council member per question. If you can just keep that in mind. We have 45 minutes total. So if you could do that, and then Mrs. Kiernan will give you the permissions to present your presentation.
Thank you very much. So I just want to give you a brief overview of my background. We did prepare your master plan, but I have over 30 years of professional experience as an architect, 7-8 years as an architect, and I have 23 years of professional experience as an planner. I have a master's degree from the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. I have written numerous master plans, but also ensuing ordinances, affordable housing plans, redevelopment plans, negotiated with special master for over 20 years of experience in affordable housing. And currently I am a planner for numerous towns. Paul, if you could give a brief overview of your experience as well.
Yeah, thank you, Sam. Yes, I've been with H2M for several years now. Really worked with Sam to complete your town's master plan. Similar experience in that I worked with on municipal master plans, as well as redevelopment plans, affordable housing plans, zoning ordinance changes, and worked with a number of municipalities as their planner as well. And then prior to that, working, community development, that kind of work as well.
Thank you, Paul. So do you mind sharing the screen, please?
All right. We're good.
Good.
Okay.
Okay, great. Next slide, please. So I wanted to just go through real quick what the ordinance process is. So the township the planning board adopted the updated master plan in September 2022. And that, as per the municipal land use law, is under the planning board's purview. But Verona's governing body then implements the goals and recommendations of the master plan. And we need to keep in mind that the master plan is a policy guide, and we very consciously wrote it in such a way that the governing body could take action without ever causing inconsistencies. So that being said, the next step would be now for you to develop ordinance changes which get introduced at the first reading. The planning board reviews it for consistency, and then you adopt the zoning ordinance at the second reading. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we have extensive experience preparing similar ordinance changes. Like, for example, Little Falls, we wrote their master plan and wrote their rezoning ordinances and redevelopment plans based on our recommendations. Same with Leonia and Pequannock. And especially Pequannock, what's interesting is very similar to Verona. They have a downtown area. They have actually 2 downtown areas along Newark, Pompton Lake, and we did an overall of the entire ordinance. As you know, when we prepared your master plan, we had interviewed all of you. We had a survey, we had downtown business owners meeting and community workshop. So we basically come with that knowledge. And one of the things that I would love to say about Verona is you have assets, you have a downtown, you have a downtown, you have Verona Park Municipal Center, but there are some limitations, and we recognized your assets in the introduction section, and also recognized that there is potential to develop upon that, and identified issues that preclude developing. So one of it was a lack of diversity in commercial spaces and lack of streamlined parking. So, so with the downtown area, we recognized that there were limited commercial spaces. The fact that there's a lot of pressure on residential properties because commercial uses in the downtown area, your Pilgrim Plaza and then the C2 on Grove, there are these limited spaces that really are commercial uses. So, then there were certain existing conditions in your ordinance that likely deters mixed use or any kind of vibrancy. So another thing we also identified that there's an impact of greater adoption of remote work. So potential for more people to actually use the downtown. So, and then there's a need for like co-working spaces. And, we did take a look, albeit it was 100-foot overview because it's a master plan, but our goal was to do it in such a way that it can then be coded into the zoning ordinances to provide teeth to this policy recommendation and an implementation strategy that the governing body can adopt. So I'm going to just briefly, and that document is 400 pages, but I just wanted to highlight just on the regarding the downtown area, where we recognize that the conditional use requirements were basically causing some challenges. So we parking, there's a perception of parking being inadequate, but we also found out that each business has their own parking requirements. So we had suggested to explore shared parking, to update parking ratios to meet modern demands. So, even we were thinking about having like a maximum front yard to really create like a downtown corridor. So we were thinking about even the design aspect. So next slide, please. So we also looked while preparing what are the changes. There was an adoption of the TCMU zone, which is an overlay zone with 15% affordable. And then there, when we wrote the master plan, I believe there was another team working on the affordable housing plan. So, we looked at those are the changes that have been implemented or with the adoption and probably entering into settlement agreement. So those are also important to consider when we're actually doing any kind of zoning work. Then finally, there are different aspects. First, we recommended that, to have an area in need of rehabilitation designation. It provides.
Oh, your sound is going in and out a little bit on your mic. We're not hearing you. It's very broken up. It's still a little fuzzy, like robot-y.
Do you find if we go onto the laptop then? Can you hear us now?
Yeah, there's a lot of problems still with the sound. It's louder, but you sound mechanical.
Yeah. Can you hear us for a second?
If you want to maybe join with a phone and use that as your voice while still presenting on your computer, you could do that.
Yeah.
I will Um, okay. Is that,
Okay, try talking now, Sam.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, why don't you turn off your phone, the mic on your Zoom thing and your phone, I think we can hear you on. But you have to come off mute, hit *9 on your phone. There
there
you
you
go.
go.
Good.
Yes,
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I can hear. So sorry about that. Anyway, so we had recommended, as I was talking about, area in need of redevelopment designation to incentivize improvements in the downtown. What that does is basically the threshold to satisfy the criteria is much lower than redevelopment, but it allows you to adopt redevelopment plans as a need may be, and it also allows you to provide incentives. They're mostly short-term 5-year tax abatements. One of the things that we also considered in the master plan was creating an improvement district along Bloomfield Avenue. And then even from a design point of view, we talked about adding wayfinding signage. We also talked about removing certain uses that are obsolete, and also to update that. And another thing that we noticed was the uses mentioned in the ordinance are so specific that it creates issues. So we tried to recommend more like general, like for example, retail services or retail sales, and we wrote that in the master plan. So these, when we wrote that, those were our thoughts of how we would be revitalizing the downtown, because you have stable neighborhoods, but your downtown is requires a lot of has a lot of potential and needs to have incentives in place to revitalize it. We also noticed 2 areas, like I mentioned, the RR zone, which also requires some kind of, something that we need to take a look at. But overall, your residential zones, as we discovered through our public engagement, through our conversations, seem to be stable single-family neighborhoods. But of course, if there are any kind of questions or any kind of changes, then that would enable us to do, because the master plan has put in enough recommendations that you wouldn't have to, amend it. That was our goal. So what's the next slide, please? So this is it from our end. We wanted to really give everybody an opportunity to talk to us and answer your questions.
Okay, great, thank you. We'll start this time with Deputy Mayor McAvoy.
I'm going to go right to my question of downtown. San, as you know, going through the master plan, there's a lot of questions came up about parking. Parking in the downtown area. My question is, do you have any, or can you tell us about some creative ideas you may have to help the parking in downtown? And if we do acquire areas to put parking lots, because I think it's going to be too costly to build a parking deck, suggestions on a distance away from businesses. The town, maybe suggest where appropriate land would be, or areas that we could change.
So as you know, well, as you know that we discussed a lot about the parking situation, and our experience was that more than, that lack of parking was more a perception than the reality of the situation. What we discovered during our study was that, a lot of individual lots had their own parking, and there was parking available, but one of our observations was that people were not ready to walk that distance, although that distance isn't much. So our thoughts about that was more considering shared parking. I think one of our other things that we noticed was that people didn't know where parking existed. So we had discussed about even having proper wayfinding signs to acknowledge, to identify parking locations. We looked into, as you rightly mentioned, a parking deck would be a very expensive proposition. We have done parking for other towns. Currently, we're writing the master plan for Little Falls, but we've been doing work in that town for 20 years, wrote the prior master plans, and we've been working with the town to have surface parking lots for their business district. So that's a good idea. We could do that. But I would say that my opinion, based on really studying for the past year, 2 years, the master plan, it more is about streamlining your parking and also to upgrade your parking standards to be more as per the current standards. So those were the two things that we noticed during the master plan process. Do you have anything to add, Paul?
No, the only thing I would say potentially to add is, and I know it also got brought up in the master plan, but you have existing parking lots with some of the religious institutions that are in close proximity to a lot of the businesses downtown. I know, I believe in previous instances, there was agreements about, on weekends when, services weren't, where essentially the parking wasn't needed by those institutions, that there's potential to utilize those spaces as well. And, the benefit of that is that it creates an efficiency. One of the major topics that got brought up was about, concerns about impervious surface coverage. So, you already have existing spots there that could potentially be better utilized, for more times during the day and during the week.
And one other thing we had also recommended in the master plan was that we were moving towards having more mixed use in the downtown area, which I think is the TC zone. And one of our things was also to have parking in such a way that it is based on the time. So, for example, the businesses park during the day, maybe the residents after 8 p.m. There is street parking that can also be utilized. So, our experience and based on working on the master plan, the lack of parking is more a perception than the reality in Verona. It's more about streamlining parking, having the parking standards to be more up to date. I hope it answers your question, Deputy Mayor.
It did. I love the idea of the wayfinding signs, and we've talked about it at council meetings in the past. It's just with changes that we went through, we didn't move forward and get it done, but I think it's something we can even start to implement in the near future. Real quick, do I have any more time?
You have time for one more question.
Okay. I want to touch on, since you know the area, the Pilgrim Shopping Plaza. It's important to Verona because it's the only supermarket in Verona. Do you have any input, any ideas on zoning of that entire piece of property and how it could help us moving forward? Any thoughts on that?
What we had noticed, and sure, one of the things that we had noticed was that with Pilgrim Plaza, it's stuck in the 1960s. There's a sea of asphalt. There are certain businesses. It's not a highest and best use of that property. some of the thoughts that we had mentioned was, for example, to have like pad sites, to have other kind of uses, but those are more on a master plan level, like, do you want to have mixed use there? So we, there are multiple, the sky's the limit when it comes to doing something, shopping centers like that. And I have experience doing it for other towns where, based on what the need is of the governing body, we could look, the goal would be, no matter what we do, the goal would be to get you rateable. So whatever planning we do has to be smart. So, our ideas were to have the, pad sites, to be able to subdivide that more, bring it closer to the street to create a more pedestrian-friendly environment, which has look into the type of uses permitted to see if we could have other uses that would generate interest and investment in the property. You may even want to consider the redevelopment designation. I'm not saying that you should, but it could very well qualify for that as well. So with that particular property, there are multiple toolboxes multiple tools in my toolbox that we could use to revitalize it, and we have the experience doing it in other towns very successfully.
Yeah, and just for an example of that, it's actually also on NJ Route 23, and in Pequannock, it was a very similar type of, outdated shopping plaza where, the store is set up very similar, where a grocery store, several other stores, very much to the rear with a sea of asphalt, essentially between the roadway and where these stores are, which created a very unappealing, unattractive area. But since the zoning change where, we've allowed pad sites, and now you see, smaller, kind of restaurants, retail that goes in the front, which both, does kind of two things. It makes it more visibly attractive. It takes, that development, can be done in a way where it improves stormwater management as well. And it can also bring you multiple reasons why people might go to that shopping center now. Maybe they go shopping, or, they go to the restaurant, and then maybe they do their shopping afterwards. So you're creating more uses, more reasons why people may, visit and, patronize those different businesses.
And one other thing I'm just
gonna cut you off so we can keep moving with some of the questions, but feel free to email us anything you want to add. Councilman Roman.
One of the uses that tends to be in demand by developers in particular are assisted living facilities. Obviously, they're sort of highly profitable land uses. We've gotten advice that an assisted living facility could be a potential use that Verona might want to consider, supporting the population aging in place. Are there any challenges that we would need to be aware of, or negatives, or anything else that we would want to know early on if we were to consider such a use? And what sort of places do they work, and what sort of places do they not work?
So I can tell you that in one of the towns I'm writing the redevelopment plan, we've actually recommended assisted living facility in areas that are more closer to towards schools or residential areas. I would not recommend an assisted living facility right in the downtown. They require slightly larger sites. And my experience has been, so for example, in one of the towns that we wrote the master plan, we recommended in the redevelopment plan an assisted living facility for a particular site, and it's in the draft state. However, somebody came with a use variance for adult daycare center, which was approved by the zoning board. So that showed me that the recommendation made sense. So going back to where we were recommending that, it was opposite of school, very close to residential areas, and it was kind of a transition space between that school and the residential area. So given the fact that we have aging population, that is a good facility. It's a good rateable for a town as well.
And then the other use that I've been asking people a lot about is professional office. Obviously, we have an entire district of sort of existing professional office. That's one of the areas where I'm sort of most curious about its potential and its future. Given all the changes in the working world, are those still viable uses? What are creative ways of working with professional offices? Or are they simply on their way out, and are there going to be redevelopment targets? Where is that sector going, in your opinion?
So in your town, it's combined with medical offices. So medical offices can't be remote. People still need to go to the doctor, and we did examine that in the master plan. And what we had recommended at that time was to look at more, different kind of spaces. Like, for example, you could even have a co-working space there. You could have a combination of office, residential. So it depends on what you want to do. But what our experience has been that, along with the doctor, with the medical offices, an urgent care near it could be a potential use. Do you have any other suggestions?
Yeah, I think the only other thing that professional offices probably have a little bit better of a shelf life compared to, say, outdated sort of office parks, particularly sub-class A parking or office parks where it's, where people have to drive long distances to get to these offices, and then it requires a significant amount of upgrading costs to get them to the point where people actually want to be able to go to these offices. Whereas like with professional offices, they can be a mix of things. They can be a mix of, a dentist or a doctor's office, as well as, your tax attorney and whatnot. So I think there's still some viability of those to be there. And, you can do other things like Sam mentioned about allowing potential for co-working spaces to also be an option in those areas.
And even personal services,
Yeah.
people, you could have those as well. I mean, I just read an article, going back to Paul's point, that in Parsippany, they converted an office park to a Topgolf. We don't have that kind of acreage in Verona. So, but given what we do, I think it would make more sense to have uses like what he mentioned, which would be complementary, because the doctor's offices are not going anywhere. So, having an urgent care, having other type of commercial uses makes a lot of sense. And again, this is preliminary. We'll delve deeper once we get assigned to the project.
Thank you.
Councilwoman McGrath.
Thank you. My question is on affordable housing. So given what's in the master plan, and also your read of the landscape for 2025, how does all of Verona's desires to implement our master plan work with what we may be faced with affordable housing? What are the big changes Verona needs to be considering in order to be prepared for the next round and limit that chance of interveners coming in and kind of dictating zoning in our own community?
So with affordable housing, I can tell you I'm doing this for other towns that I'm hired as a planner. One thing I can tell you is that if you have a sound plan, an intervener is not going to waste your time. And I'll give you an example. For one of my towns, if I came to H2M, I ran their planning department. We had an intervener who tried to, it was in 2015, intervene, but our plan was so sound that they won't waste their money. If you have a plan in place that is sound and defensible, and you have had a settlement agreement, you're implementing all whatever that is a part of the settlement agreement. So whatever different mechanisms you have in place, if you're implementing those, I would advise you to not be fearful of that. That's number one. Number two, when you have an affordable housing plan in place, right? You develop it, you have you have an overlay zone, you'll have rental units, you'll get credits on that. So 2025, it's good to be proactive than reactive and be prepared. But my experience has been, based on my towns as well, is that just be aware of it, but don't panic. So have mechanisms in place in advance. Like, for example, if and I haven't prepared your affordable housing plan, but I've prepared for other towns. I'll give you an example. For one of the towns, I don't want to disclose their name. They had a settlement agreement in place, and you estimate. So you estimate a density of, say, 12 dwelling units per acre. And when the development got built, we had bonus units. So, you never know in 2 years as these get developed, whether you're going to get bonus units, bonus credits. So, interveners, yes, that's the right approach, Councilman McGrath, that you are concerned about that. But at the same time, know that 2025 will be very different than 2015 because you have a plan in place and you're going ahead and implementing. When do you need to worry? If you're not implementing your affordable housing plan. I hope that answers your question.
It does. And my second question is, as you know from the master plan, residents want to see Bloomfield Avenue look more beautiful, be more walkable, have robust businesses, but at the same time they want to keep this small town feel. So how would you advise us on how we keep a small town feel while at the same time strengthening that whole corridor on Bloomfield Avenue?
So you can continue keeping the small town feel by really concentrating developments in the pocket where you would say, and again, this is my viewpoint, you have your town center, that's where you focus everything on. You do not go very close to any residential single family neighborhoods because you continue to maintain their character. You have development, this Sunset redevelopment plan, you have Annan Lofts, you have Verona Place, and then there's one other, the depot development. So there, for any area to become vibrant, you need to have what they call critical mass in economic development, right? So you already are, due to your settlement agreement, you are developing this critical mass. What you need to have in place is some kind of a mixed use, maybe above certain businesses for Verona residents to age in place. So, when we analyze, so when we do master plans, we look at everything from, like I said, 100 feet. But when we actually do the zoning ordinances, we'll go into greater detail analyzing your properties, because whatever you put in the zoning ordinance or the redevelopment plan or the rehabilitation, designation, it has to be realistic and buildable, and people in the town need to buy in, and buy-in is very important, as you know. And because we've conducted such extensive surveys, we know what the pulse is, what Verona residents want. I hope that answers your question.
Okay, do you have time for one more question, Councilwoman, if you would like, if you have anything, or?
No, in the interest of time, I'm going to go let you take your turn.
Okay, great, thank you. Well, I thank you guys for these questions, for answering these questions and providing some insight. I just have a couple to close out. The first is, as a governing body, we do hear requests from property owners to change the zoning on their property from the existing zoning, often in the interim between master plans or rezoning or things like that, does put the governing body in a difficult position considering these things while maintaining our zoning code. What recommendations do you have to develop a code that can grow with the town so that we don't have these requests in the future?
Actually, you aren't the only town that has this. And fortunately, unfortunately, we've had to deal with other towns too. So there are two ways of looking at it. First, I think in the master plan, we had recommended that, to get rid of the specificity in your zoning ordinance. Like, for example, Paul, what did we say? Retail sale and retail sales to not get into the nitty-gritties of permitted uses. That's one way of doing. Second way of doing it is if and I've had to do this in other towns too, where there's a potential property owner who has a large parcel of land. Your bottom line is, A, are you planning to give a sound rateable for your town? B, are you planning in such a way that it would not take away from the character of your town? So those are the two things you need to consider. So when someone comes with a zone change, it's important to know what that zone change would be. If it is something that the town wants, there are different ways of going about doing it. But the bottom line is there are two ways of doing it. One, the way our ordinance we are recommending it to be written, and the way we would write it is to make it as generic as possible, so that you can get more, I would say, uses that you do want to attract or investments that you want to attract in your town. Two, you could do it through the rehabilitation. And, if somebody wants to do something that the town says is wonderful, we could do it through the rehab. So what that does is you have a redevelopment plan in place, which is like a zoning ordinance. And, so instead of, and again, there are market changes. Market is not, the one thing that is constant is the flexibility or the changeability of market. But our goal in every ordinance we write is to write it in such a way that you don't need to keep amending your master plan. So we try to provide that kind of a policy guide for you. If property owners come to you, it's worth considering what they want. So for example, what we discovered when we were talking to, we met with all your downtown business owners, and they said to us that one of their challenges was, I believe, the 50% split between uses in the downtown district. I mean, these are easy fixes, Another thing is, a pool arcade doesn't make sense, but having like a brew pub or micro distilleries they are a good economic development drivers, if you will. And
then the only thing I would add too is, if you're seeing a pattern of requests or a pattern of variances that are being requested, that is one aspect where you're seeing a clear pattern where you can make the change and be, in essence, be flexible enough where it's, so that you don't have to constantly be making these changes over time, which is different from if it's just a very specific request. We want to look at holistically on these different zones and the corridors about what makes the most sense along these areas.
And I want to also add to that real quick, that, when you talk about property owners coming with requests, we've had to do this in one of the towns where there were 4 or 5 use variances for the same kind of use along a predominantly commercial corridor, which, no, it's like 5 or 6, right? So which really made us recommend to them that, based on that, please rezone to permit this, because you can do zoning by variance. So that's another, I don't know, Mayor, if that answers the question.
No, I think you raised some great points, and I appreciate it. I have one final question to close this out this evening. One of the critiques that we often get from the public is that our zoning ordinance is very complex and not very user-friendly, which leads to phone calls to members of the council and township manager and things like that. In a rewrite of the zoning ordinance, what are some strategies that could be used to make the ordinance more interpretable by the resident versus an engineer or a planner or a lawyer?
Do you want to take it?
Yeah, what I would say is, you can do different things, and I think you may have started doing some of these with, being as accessible with, online as possible about what the regulations are. I would also say that, and it did come up about, you know, why there are so many zones in your township. But I think one of the main things is really trying to, again, look at patterns of what is kind of being requested. And then, you know, at the end of the day, it's kind of working with you all on the council about what is kind of, if you're making changes, particularly in these residential zones, about what is a realistic change and what might be something you might still want to keep, you know, given that you have goals and kind of want to think about, you know, particularly with resiliency and sustainability that might be impacted if by accepting some of these changes.
And then one other thing I wanted to add to that too is, you know, when you talk about complexities, one of our recommendations too was that to simplify the ordinance, simplify the uses. Sometimes what happens too with ordinances, they get amended over time, but if there is conflicting language, that doesn't get corrected. So that happens a lot too. So, you know, it's when people find it difficult to interpret, it's also because of that. The complexity also comes from the fact that there are all this data and no consistency between them. And you're not the only town. There are a lot of towns in New Jersey that have that same issue, that they amended section 150-40, but 45 has completely conflicting language. So, and
so a benefit of doing this kind of comprehensive look or redo of your zoning code would be to catch those kind of, you know, conflicting language and redundancies to ensure that that those would be eliminated as fast as possible.
And we did that for Pequannock. We wrote the master plan in 2018, 2020, which was adopted, and then we wrote the entire ordinance from 2020 onwards and recodified it as well. So,
well, thank you very much. And that concludes our session now with H2M.
Thank you very much.
For the public's edification, the discussion on the planner will take place at our September 11th regular council meeting. As once we have had time to go through the presentations and the questions, all of that we'll discuss on our September 11th meeting. Our next special meeting is on Tuesday, the 29th of August at 7 o'clock, which is our goal setting meeting, and the public is welcome to attend. Is there any other new business to come before the council today?
Thank you very much for your time.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam.
Any other new business? All right, hearing none, are there any motions to be made?
We do need to call, do we call for public participation there?
Oh, sorry, yes, public participation. At this time, we will open for public comment. Madam Clerk, would you please read the public participation statement?
Jess, if you're willing, if you're looking to speak on any matter, you can do so by hitting the raise hand button on your monitor. You'll have 4 minutes to address the council. Please do not provide your street address. Your name and township are sufficient, and these meetings will be posted to the township's YouTube website, and names and addresses will not be redacted. Anybody wishing to speak, you can raise your hand now. I guess there's nobody there.
Seeing none, I'm going to close public comment. This time, we're not going to executive session. Are there any motions to be made?
I will
Motion
move
to close.
I will second the deputy mayor.
Deputy Mayor has motioned to adjourn the meeting, and Councilman Roman has seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed is welcome to stay on the meeting. The rest of us will be leaving for the day. Thank you, everyone.
Have a good weekend, everyone.
Have a nice weekend.
Take care, Joe.
Thanks, Pat. You're muted, but I get it.
Good weekend.
Talk to you soon.
All right.
Bye.